sit back, relax, and get ready to enjoy another awesome video by Capt Frank Lanier. Please subscribe, like, and share with all your friends and all the people you hate too. For today's find, we're in the lazarette of a mid-sized trawler, and looking over to the left here, you'll see some brownish stains, running stains oozing down from the, this is from the deck above the lazarette. And what it indicates is there's moisture intrusion and possible deterioration of the coring material in the deck. That's what this brownish ooze is. And that's today's 60-second survey. For today's find, we're looking at problems with an LPG system. First up, the locker drain. That's the hole right there for the drain. And it drains onto the cockpit deck, and the builder has decided, well, it could just drain there and drain through the cockpit scupper, which is unacceptable per ABYC recommendations. It needs to drain directly overboard. Another thing ABYC doesn't like is this vertical opening locker. They like for it to be horizontal and at the top. And finally, stuff. We've got stuff in the locker. It should be a dedicated locker, meaning nothing else is stored in there except the LPG system components. And that's today's 60-second survey. For today's find, we have another version of what is this? What is this thing right here? Well, if you'll notice, you've got two battery switches for two separate battery banks. This is the emergency combiner or parallel switch. And what it does, you take this handle and you pop it in there, and you can turn it on in the on position, and it combined these two battery banks in an emergency in case you had a start battery and it died, and then you could use the house bank to start the engine. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, we're looking at the AC shore power inlet on a larger catamaran, and you can see the shore power inlet itself here has come loose because it was initially mounted with screws, which are a terrible choice to mount pretty much anything in fiberglass because they have a tendency to pull out. So the recommendation here is to remount this AC shore power inlet using through bolts, washers, lug nuts, and the like. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, things that indicate a boat may have taken on water at some point. You see this line right here where the wood is deteriorated. This is would be a red flag, but you want to check other places. Underneath this hatch, you see how the wood is delaminated and deteriorated. That's another indication that these water level has been above the floorboards. But we'll continue down the hull here. You can see here as well a water line, and you just kind of walk down the hull, and this is on a larger catamaran. You'll see other indications here, wood deterioration here, and on the other side as well. We're looking here under the trim. You can see it's showing signs of delamination as well. So all of these are indicators that the boat has been partially submerged, or at least taken on water 2 to 3 inches above the floorboard. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, we're looking at a through hull on a mid-sized powerboat. So we're looking at the hose here, and you take a shine of the light here. This is how you can really see. And it's got a little bit of deterioration right there. But the real alarming thing about this is that if you look right here, this is the end of it. So it's just cut off. The guy has not plugged it or capped it or anything. He's just basically came here and cut off the hose and done nothing with it. So of course the recommendation here is to properly cap this through hole, particularly if you're not going to use it. Then I would just go ahead and cap it at the seacock there, and then ideally at some point, if you're not going to use the through hole at all, then you remove it. But that's today's 60-second survey. For today's find, we're looking at an installation where a guy has taken CAN bus fuses and he's Frankensteined a fuse holder out of crimp-on terminals, and he's also secured the wiring to the Samson post here. He just wrapped it around with wire ties. So the recommendation here is to remove these bastardized CAN bus fuse holders and install proper marine grade fuses, a fuse block or whatever, and properly support these wire runs. For today's find, we're looking at an installation where a guy has taken CAN bus fuses and he's Frankensteined a fuse holder out of crimp-on terminals, and he's also secured the wiring to the Samson post here. He just wrapped it around with wire ties. So the recommendation here is to remove these bastardized CAN bus fuse holders and install proper marine grade fuses, a fuse block or whatever, and properly support these wire runs. For today's find, we're looking at composite through hulls located above the waterline. You've got two of them here. One on the left has the flange in place. The one on the right, the flange, the body of the through hull is cracked around where the flange is, and the flange is completely fallen off. There is nothing to keep this through hull from falling back into the vessel. The flange is what holds it in place along with the nut on the back of the through hull. Composite through hull damage such as this is typically due to the result of UV damage and age. So the recommendation here is to first replace this damaged through hull and then inspect the rest of the composite or plastic through hulls above the waterline because they're probably the same age and similarly prone to failure. And that's today's 60-second survey. So for today's find, we've got the raw water intake for a generator, as you can see right here. And this is the raw water intake for the generator here. There's the strainer. And they've used fuel hose instead of the proper marine grade water hose that should be used on a fitting below the waterline. So of course this needs to be replaced. And that's today's 60-second survey. So for today's find, we're looking at the zincs on a sail drive. And these are still serviceable, but this one here is loose and it's not going to be providing the protection that it should be if it's loose. So it needs to be tightened up. And that's today's 60-second survey. So for today's find, we're looking at the zincs on a sail drive. And these are still serviceable, but this one here is loose and it's not going to be providing the protection that it should be if it's loose. So it needs to be tightened up. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, something good for a change. And what we're going to be talking about is this item right here. What is this? What does this thing right here do? Well, I've probably covered it in a previous video, but this is such a good example of it, we're going to cover it again. And what this does is, if you have a shaft, there's your shaft for your engine. If you do not have room to put the sacrificial anodes on the outside, you know what people typically call zincs, although they're not always zincs. If you don't have room to put them on the shaft in between the prop and the strut or whatever, then you have what's called a shaft brush. Although this is not a brush, it serves the same purpose, right? So what it does is you'll typically have a transom plate, a sacrificial anode, a transom plate on the back, and you got a wire running into that, and that wire comes up to here into this unit, and this is pressed onto the shaft and makes contact, and this is what provides your protection for your shaft. And when you check these, you always want to look and make sure the wires are good and tight and connected, and you're getting good connection here at the shaft. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, we're looking at the bilge pump system in the lazarette of a larger motor yacht. And we're looking at here, and here's your bilge alarm, and this is your float for your pump right there. And what we're looking at, the problem is if you look right here, you'll see that this is what this is a check valve, one-way check valve. And the owner has probably installed this to prevent water from coming back into the bilge. Once you pump this thing up, it's got quite a bit of head as it goes up there. So if you don't have this, the water just kind of drains back down into the sump here. And the problem is these check valves are prone to corroding and freezing up and getting blocked by trash and stuff. Per ABYC recommendations, American Boating Yacht Council, they do not recommend having any check valves in the bilge pump system. So the recommendation here will be to remove it. And that's today's 60-second survey. So for today's find, something good. You have two unused through hulls. These are located below the waterline, and of course the through hulls, they have seacocks on them, and they're not being utilized, so they are capped. And that's what you want to see. You cap these things so that if in case the seacock was to vibrate open or whatever, you're still capped. So a lot of times I'll see where people, when they do this, they'll just cut the hose and don't plug it or cap it and just leave them open, which of course can sink your boat. So for today, a good thing. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today, we're going to be talking about a question I often get on my channel when I make recommendations such as for seacocks and through holes below the waterline. I'll say, use a suitable marine grade hose that is designed for use below the waterline. And I have people ask me, well, how do you know that? How do you know that this is suitable for use below the waterline? Well, as I tell them, it's going to be labeled. These marine grade hoses will be labeled as to their use. And okay, marine hose, you could use this one. It's a multi-use hose. It can be used for fuel, it can be used for wet exhaust, or water, which is what you would use as either raw water coolant on a through hole fitting below the waterline that provides cooling water to the engine. So your hose will be labeled as to what it can be used for. Same thing here. Let's look here. Here's another one. Fuel, water, wet exhaust. Okay, so the hose will tell you what it's designed to be used for. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, something good. This is a portable fire extinguisher, and it has a tag here. This is the kind of stuff that I like to look for when I do a survey. You look at the inspection tag, and this inspection tag will give you some information on the unit itself. One, the last professional inspection of this fire extinguisher, its punched was January 2024. So it's good for 1 year from that date that it's purchased. So as it is now, January 2025, it's good now, but it needs to be inspected before the end of the month. The other thing I like to look for, you can see here where the owner-operators have been checking the unit monthly. And what they do is they check it monthly. You look and make sure that the pressure gauge is reading properly or it's full. And you check the unit for corrosion or damage. Make sure that the bracket is in good condition. That's the kind of stuff you look at on your own every month. And that's in addition to the professional inspection annually. And that's today's 60-second survey. Okay, so for today's find, we're looking at a bait well pump for a mid-sized power boat. Just trying to get you a good view here, right? There's a couple of issues with this pump. One, we've already talked about in a previous 60-second survey. You've got a plastic pump screwed onto a bronze seacock. So those are different materials. They have different expansion contraction ratios. You don't want to have a composite fitting screwed onto a brass fitting or a bronze fitting or vice versa. The other issue is the seacock is frozen, so you can't open it or shut it. And finally, if you look at it, they got the hose coming out here, and then look at the hose that they have attached it to going up to the bait well. You can see that it's in very bad shape and deteriorated and is in need of immediate replacement. Okay, so for today's find, we're on a mid-size or larger catamaran, it's about 42 foot, and in one of the hulls they have stored one of their propane tanks. This is an extra tank that they use in addition to the two that they have in the actual propane locker. Of course, this is not a proper place or way to store this tank, so the recommendation, of course, is to either put it in the tank in the locker, the dedicated propane locker, or store this in a manner that's compliant with ABYC recommendations in a dedicated locker where it can vent overboard and so on. Okay, so for today's find, we're looking at a exhaust system on a larger catamaran on one of the engines. This is the water lift muffler for the engine, and you can see it's not really properly mounted. It's just kind of hanging here, these straps, these ropes. So of course this needs to be properly mounted so that there's no play in it and it can't wiggle around like that. And that's today's 60-second survey. So for today's find, we're looking at this stain on a mattress, right? Assuming it's not something nasty, which is what you would originally think. Leaks and stains are your boat's way of telling you something's going on. So you look at this and you don't just think, well, hey, there's a stain here. What you do is you should look at this and say, okay, there's a stain here. Why is there a stain here? What's the cause of it? Again, this is your boat's way of telling you something's going on. Well, the most obvious thing would be to look up here. And here's your hatch. You've got a hatch right above the mattress. And chances are this hatch is probably leaking or has leaked at some point, or there may be some water intrusion into the core and stuff that could be leaking in here, and that's why you've got this brownish stain. Anyway, the takeaway here is that anytime you see something highly unusual, a leak, a stain, don't just accept it. Try to find out why it's leaking. And that's today's 60-second survey. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, and you want to buy Captain Frank a cup of coffee, please click on the thanks button below this video. All tips received, not spent on coffee, will be used to improve my YouTube channel and create even more awesome videos.